Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us for today's program. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to draw your attention to our disclaimer on screen. Please take a moment to read it. Now, for those of you who have joined us over the past several months, you'll notice that things look a little bit different today. My name is Katie Riley, and I will be your moderator today for a special webinar where I get to turn the tables on Joan Woodward to get her take on the economic and political outlook for 2020. Now, this is the 7th webinar in our Wednesdays with Woodward series, where we invite thought leaders to join us to discuss pressing topics that impact us in both our personal and professional lives. Over the next few months, every other Wednesday, we'll host these free educational webinars. You can visit us at travelersinstitute.org to see recordings of our past webinars and also register for upcoming events. Now, today we get to hear from Joan Woodward, President of the Travelers Institute and Executive Vice President of Public Policy at Travelers. She will provide an economic and political outlook for 2020 and beyond. And what a year this has been. We have seen historically high unemployment rates, coupled with the worst economic slowdown the US has ever seen. So the question becomes, what does this mean for the upcoming election? And what does it really mean for the insurance industry? Joan is uniquely qualified to offer these insights, drawing on her experience working on Capitol Hill for 12 years in roles including Deputy Chief of Staff for the US Senate Finance Committee, where she helped create the Roth IRA. She was also the chief economist for the Senate Governmental Affairs Committee and worked on the House Budget Committee under the leadership of Committee Chairman John Kasich. Joan also spent 10 years at Goldman Sachs as the founding executive director of their Global Markets Institute and as vice president and director of Washington Equity and Bond Research. Joan sits on the board of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation and on the board of the Rand Institute for Civil Justice. Now, before I hand it off to Joan, just a quick note about submitting questions, because I know there's going to be a lot of questions about this topic. We'll save time for audience questions at the end of the program, but please don't wait until the end to submit your questions. You can submit your questions anytime throughout the presentation using the Q&A function found at the bottom of your screen. Check Send Anonymously if you don't want your name attached to the question. So with that, please join me in welcoming Joan Woodward.
Hi, Katie, and thank you so much for that nice introduction. Thank you all again for joining us. We have a very packed agenda, and so I'm going to get right to it. And I do hope I get some tough questions from the crowd. So here's the agenda for the next half hour. We're going to talk about the economic outlook and what to expect there to the extent that we can figure it out. COVID-related topics and trends, the political outlook for this year and beyond. And then, of course, a little bit about what's going on at the Travelers Institute, which is our public policy thought leadership platform for the company. So where are we now? We are not in good shape. Here is a quarterly update of GDP. As you can see, the first quarter of GDP, which included a pretty robust January and February, and of course fell off the cliff in March, was only down 5%. And now we're down in the second quarter, the worst quarter in the entire United States history since they've been tracking GDP, down over 30%. So the question will be, how bad will Q3 look? Not as bad as Q2 because a lot of the country has opened up. A lot of people are back at work, as you can evidence by, just cars on the road when you're traveling. So we will see a better number in Q2 and hopefully in Q4. And then, of course, the Federal Reserve is now predicting overall the economy for the entire year should be down about 6.5%. So that's probably in line with what we're thinking. Okay, there we are with Q2. So the unemployment rate is at historic highs, as we just said. The unemployment rate hit 14%, 14.7 back in April. Again, that was one of the worst in the history of the United States. Before COVID, though, we were doing quite well at 3.5%. So pre-COVID, we were at full employment. Full employment is everyone who wants a job basically has a job in the economy. And that full employment, as you can see, was also during the Korean War, Vietnam War, and the end of the tech boom during those circled areas in my chart. So COVID-19 drives bond yields to really historic lows. We see the 2-year at only 14 basis points, the 10-year is 68 basis points, and so on. So what does this mean for our economy having such low interest rates? Obviously, it's good for the housing market, right? If you're looking for a mortgage or refinancing, that market certainly is seeing some quite good activity over the last couple of months. Let's talk a bit about the yield curve. So the yield curve is nothing more than the difference between the 2-year and the 10-year Treasury bond. So when the yield curve inverts, this is a little technical, but it's pretty easy to follow. These are the periods in time on my screen. You can see when the yield curve is inverted in the past, so 1989 and 2000. And what's interesting about the yield curve inversion, it has historically predicted a recession that's just around the corner. Between 6 and 18 months after an inversion, we've always seen a recession. So when the yield curve inverted back in August, end of August, as you can see on my chart here, for a couple of days, people were saying, this is different, times are different, we're not going to have a recession following this inversion. And I agree with that. We would not have a recession following this inversion because of the economy, but of course we are in recession because of COVID. So again, the history books will prove the inversion did, of course, have a recession right after it. Okay, what is the emergency rate cuts and the Federal Reserve doing, and will that be enough to get our economy stimulated again? The Federal Reserve Fed funds rate right now, well, first of all, let's go back to 1984, when, I don't know if any of you on this call had a mortgage back then. Mortgage rates were between 16 and 18%. When the Fed funds rate was at 11.5%. But since then, as you can see on my chart, the Federal Reserve raises interest rates when the economy is on fire and growing, and of course has to cut them when we're in recessionary periods. And you can see this, the recessionary periods here, always on my charts, are shaded in gray. So the Fed fund rate today sits at 25 basis points, kind of just where it was back in the Great Recession of 2008, 2009. So the Fed has announced they will not go to zero. We think that's a good thing, keeping interest rates at a quarter basis point. What is the correlation between recessions and presidential re-elections? So this is a quite interesting chart. We took a look all the way back for many years, over 100 years. And these presidents, these are 2-term presidents on the left side of the chart here. So if that president during his first term had no recession in the 2 years prior to his reelection, that president was reelected. So all the presidents on the left side there were 2-term presidents, and they had no recession during those last 2 years of their first term. Look at the right side of my chart. These presidents had a recession in the last 2 years of their first term, and they were not elected. Pretty good indicator, right? So if there's a recessionary period during the last 2 years of a presidential term, think Mr. Trump, historically, you're not going to get reelected. But the question for us is, will Trump be like Calvin Coolidge, who actually had a recession in his last 2 years in the 1920s and got reelected? So think about that, my friends, on election night. Will Trump buck the historical trends here and be able to pull off a win, having one of the deepest recessions we've had in our history in the United States? You're answering that question in your head as I'm talking, I'm sure. Okay, so let's take a look at another indicator of whether or not the president seems to have good momentum behind him. And we hear this president talking a lot about the S&P 500 gains. So I thought I'd plot this chart. This chart shows from the day they walked in the door, so President Nixon there walking in the door, and how the S&P 500 did under their watch in the first 3.5 years of their presidency. So I'm just going to click through these presidents here. And again, from the day they arrived to the day they left and what that looked like. So Clinton Again, S&P 500 did very well. W. Bush, as you all know, walked out the door with one of the great recessions we've had. So the S&P 500 was down 19.6% on his watch. Then we had Obama. Of course, when he walked in, it was only up from there. S&P did quite well. Trump, I'm sure, would not like this chart because he sits right now underneath Obama and Clinton. But I have to say, given where we were back in February with the market decline, this is not a bad outcome for him. And in fact, the S&P, as you all know, about a week ago hit pre-COVID levels. We've been down in the last week because of the tech issues. But the markets, as Trump does say often, are doing quite well. What about consumer sentiment? So how are we feeling as a country? And I also like to overlay the equity markets on that because everyone looks at their 401ks, as I do, quite often. So the consumer confidence, as you can see in this chart, dramatically dropped during COVID. We are back now up to about 74% of people polled said they feel good about their economic situation. That's what consumer confidence means. And then if you overlay the equity markets, if you've heard me speak before, this is one of my favorite charts. It basically just shows that how people are feeling about their own economic situation. The S&P tracks that quite nicely. There's a pretty big correlation between the markets and how consumers are feeling. So what's going on in small business? As you all know, we're one of the largest insurers of small business in our country. Small business confidence took a pretty big hit. As you can see, this is the last recessionary period here. Took a pretty big hit during the last several months. But when Trump got elected, look at this pretty big spike in how small businesses felt. 94.9% of them felt very optimistic when Trump got elected. He said he would cut their taxes and he would cut red tape. What did he do? He did just that. So small business confidence is rebounded, I think, pretty nicely since we've hit COVID. And these numbers actually are pretty high, I think. I believe them, and small business owners have to be confident, right, in their own economic situation. We hope some of those businesses who went out of business can regain and come back out of closing their doors. Okay, so how about home sales? How did home sales fare during this economic period? Well, as you see back in 2008, 9, and 10, we were kind of stuck at the new residential home sales around 400,000 units a month, and we couldn't get out of that. And you can see in July, just this past month or so, this summer we're over 900,000 units. That is a really, really good sign. So people are buying homes. People are buying homes in the suburb. People are buying second homes and vacation homes, those, of course, that can afford it. So the housing market here really is interesting to me. Obviously, it's mortgage rates and being so low. A lot of people are taking advantage of that. But this is a very good sign, my friends, that people are feeling economically confident in their situation enough to buy a home. What about retail sales? We had a big number come out this morning. It wasn't quite as big as people hoped. I think people were hoping around over 1%. It came out at 0.6%. But after this enormous drop-off we saw during COVID, retail sales have rebounded. And so in January, if you look back on this chart, January of 2000, retail sales were about 158 billion. March of 2009, right in the teeth of the recessionary period, about 158 billion. Our low back in April in terms of retail sales were 158 billion. So if you look at those three numbers there on the bottom of my chart, during recessionary periods, we all kind of gravitated back to spending about 158 billion net as a country during a recessionary period. And you can see where the numbers are in August, looking quite good. So consumer spending has always driven our economy. We're a consumption-led country, unlike some others in Asia who are mostly more saving countries. So keep that in mind too. As long as the consumer is spending, and of course we're spending it in different ways. We're spending it online a lot more now. I know we get my wonderful husband and family. It's my 31st wedding anniversary today, by the way. And we get 3 or 4 boxes of Amazon packages in the mail every day. And I'm sure you do too. This is just a new way of life. And we won't talk about postal service issues right now, but it is certainly keeping the economy going on retail sales. What's not so good for us, so the last couple of charts, I talked a lot about being optimistic and consumers driving things and buying things, buying cars too. This number is troubling to me. So 7 million Americans out there are 3 months late on a car payment. So 7 million Americans are delinquent more than 90 days in paying their car payments. And that's out of 89 million Americans who currently have a car loan. So that's about 8%. And my friends, this number was pre-COVID. So pre-COVID, I told you that our unemployment rate was 3.5%, and the economy was rolling right along with GDP growing, between 3 and 4% right before COVID hit. But yet 7 million of us still had delinquent car payments. Now, I would think that most people would choose to pay their mortgages because that's more important than their car payments. But still, this is a pretty troubling number. And again, to me, showing the income inequality in this country and people making still the minimum wage. So keep that in the back of your mind as well. Okay, let's talk a little bit about COVID. I have a few charts here. So I'm sure all of you are looking similar to this lady on the left here. She's got her coffee in a bright yellow mug. She's got her cat perfectly perched, and she's got her 6, looks to me like computer screens. She must be a hedge fund trader or something. Looks to me like 3 or 4 screens there. So I'm sure we all look like that, but in fact, half of us look like this. So Gallup did a poll showing that half of us who normally got all dressed up, put the makeup and hair and high heels and went out the door, we are now looking like half of us are staying home looking like the right side of this page, that half of us don't get out of our pajamas or sweatpants. How many of you are sitting there without pants with a zipper? Someone told me that's the way you can measure whether or not you got dressed for your day. How many of us are wearing that blazer like the lady on the left side? So it turns out about half are on the left and half are on the right. So to get serious for a minute, testing. We hear a lot about testing and whether or not this is important for the country. CDC guidelines have recently changed on this. This is the US and how many tests we're doing per 1 million of us in the population. So we're doing about 280,000 tests per 1 million, and you can see where we sit. Iceland, Denmark, Hong Kong, Israel, UK, even Russia, according to this chart, is doing a little bit better than us in terms of testing. But we were definitely unprepared for this. If you look at other countries around the world, especially in Western Europe, Austria, Germany, Italy, France, UK, these are the practicing physicians per 1,000 people, and the US sits at 2.6 docs for every 1,000 people out there. And I find it interesting that China's at two docs for every 1,000 people they have. We were unprepared. Hospital beds per 1,000 people. So if you look at this, the US and Canada sit there about 2.8 beds per 1,000 people, but you look at South Korea and Germany and Austria, again, a lot of the Western European countries, many more hospital beds per 1,000 people. So what are we doing as a society to try to help our economy and help get people back on their feet? This is the COVID spending so far. So if you think about the 4 bills that Congress has currently passed and President signed into law, so the Paycheck Protection Act, the PPP, the stimulus checks that most people got, this is how the pie kind of breaks down. And the PPP loans were the largest amount of money that got spent out of the 2.6 trillion that was spent so far. Stimulus checks were about 11%. Direct relief for COVID funds, the unemployment, the extra $600, which of course has now expired, was about 15% of the pie. So there's 2.6 trillion that Congress spent this summer. And of course, we're all waiting to see whether Nancy Pelosi will agree with Trump and pass another stimulus bill. Again, to shore up the unemployment numbers and extend the PPP program. But this is where we are today. And what does that mean for our deficit? I know a number of you out there I've talked to about the federal deficit and the public debt. So let's take a look at the 2.6 trillion that I just showed you that we spent this summer on COVID relief and where that does for our annual deficits. You can see this is a line of annual deficits. And if you look to the left of my chart there, you'll see where we are currently with the federal budget deficit. that blink in time during Clinton's administration, those four little green lines you see, we actually ran a budget surplus during that time. From 1998 to 2001, our budget was actually balanced and in slight surplus. But here we are today, sitting in today's dollars, $3.8 trillion in annual deficits for this year. And then if you look at the end of World War I, as a percent of GDP, the public debt stood at 78% of GDP. And today we're over 100% of our GDP in terms of the federal debt, the total federal debt, cumulative debt of all the deficits over the years. Very troubling for most economists to look at this chart. But again, we have to use the tools in our toolbox to stimulate the economy. And of course, they did do that this summer. So what does all this spending and COVID mean for politics? So I'll give a little disclaimer. All the numbers you're going to see here, everything in my deck has been, these are factual numbers. These are not projections. These are factual numbers that we've been able to glean from a number of sources, as you'll see in my deck. And any views that I express personally are my personal views. They're not reflective of the company. So I just want to make that clear that anything I say and making a prediction or two in the next couple of slides are my views only. So let's look at what has happened in the polling. So these are polling numbers for certain governors. So how to read this chart is people have really rallied around their governors, and I think Andrew Cuomo certainly, and Mike DeWine in Ohio, Phil Murphy in New Jersey, their popularity numbers kind of went. So if you look at Cuomo, pre-COVID, his popularity was 49%. He shot up to 77% approval rating post-COVID or where we are today. DeSantis is the only one on my chart, at least of these selected governors of large states, who went down. So he was at 59 before, now he's at 43. Most interesting to me, and this number just recently came out, Trump was at 41% pre-COVID. He's now at 45%. And that number jumped up in the last week or so. So Trump's approval rating was always hovering in the low 40s. He had a and still has a very, very strong and vocal base of support. His base is very much with him and very much will turn out to vote, by the way. Voter turnout is key for Trump. But he's never been able to crack 50, right? And does that matter? He's very happy, I think, with these numbers that are recently come out and showing him up 4% in the COVID soup, if you will. So most of the governors have enjoyed a pretty big boost, except DeSantis and a few others. What effect is all this going to have on the election? And that really is the critical and key issue. And no one would have predicted this in February, but this is all about the pandemic now. So 2/3 of Americans think it's likely that COVID-19 will disrupt the election. 2/3 of Americans. If you're a Democrat, 80% of Democrats polled said that it's very likely or somewhat likely that COVID's going to upset the election. Republicans are at 50%. Percent who favor conducting all elections by mail. Look at this number. So the total in 2018, when people were polled by Pew, this is Pew data, Pew Research. So in 2018, 34% of Americans said they favor voting by mail. In 2020, 52% of all Americans say they favor voting by mail. And if you look at the Republican numbers, they haven't changed much in the last couple of years, but the Democratic numbers have shot up dramatically, and now 69% of Democrats say they want elections by mail. So will COVID-19 impact how we vote? This is a chart showing that, and especially if you're a state, if you're looking at your state right now, and I have you highlighted in yellow, the states have recently made changes due to COVID-19, are the states that they're shaded in yellow. The states that are shaded in green, 39 million Americans who live in those states shaded in green need an excuse beyond just saying, I want to vote by absentee because of COVID. So you have to have another excuse. You're in the military, you're out of town for business, but you have to have another excuse beyond just saying, I want an absentee ballot because of COVID. But on the other hand, the states that are shaded in gray, 195 million of us can vote by mail just requesting an absentee ballot. And again, a lot of states have changed how they look at this due to COVID. Let's talk about taxes for a minute. So how will Biden's 3.8 trillion tax plan affect you? He will raise taxes if he comes to office, no doubt about it. Taxes will go up dramatically if the House will stay Democratic. I'll make that bold prediction. The House will definitely stay Democratic, and Nancy's going to pick up a bunch of seats. The question is the Senate. So if Biden does win, I do think the Senate will flip and become Democrat, and I do think that Democrats, the House, the Senate, the White House will raise taxes dramatically. Look at all the spending we just did. Look at all the more spending we're going to have to do to get out of this situation. So the corporate tax rate, current corporate tax rate, which was cut a couple of years ago, is 21%. Biden's plan is to go to 28%. That's not as far as it was before. Before the Trump tax cut, it was at 35%. The alternative minimum tax for companies, raising the Social Security wage cap. This will affect most people on this call. So the current wage cap, you get taxed 6.2% on your side, 6.2% on your employer side, up to a current $138,000 of income. Biden will raise that cap to $400,000. And I might predict on this call that might even go to $500,000 because there's a lot of money to be made if you raise the wage cap higher than $400,000. And I'm sure that the House, Nancy Pelosi, a lot of the other kind of AOC type folks would want to raise it a lot higher. So I'd watch out for that. If we have a full sweep of Democrats, that Social Security wage cap will go up. And then of course, for higher income owners, higher income folks, that income over $400,000 will go up from the current 37. It'll revert back to the Clinton era, which is 39.6. So that top rate will go back to 39.6. For those of you making more than $400,000. So we will watch for that. And this will be one of the very first bills that becomes law because they can move it very quickly if the Democrats control the entire Washington scene. So where do people stand around the globe? This is back to COVID and thinking about the economy. So should the economy and businesses open, even if the virus is not fully contained? So again, this is the question put to global folks. The United States came in that only 35% of us believe that the economy should be fully open, even the virus is not fully contained. So I thought that was pretty interesting. If you go over on the right hand and look at Russia, or if you go over on the left hand and look at the UK or Canada, UK and Canada is much more interested in keeping their economies closed until the virus is fully contained. We're kind of in the middle, I would say, here relative to other countries. So let's have some fun. Again, these are my views and not the views of the company. But I will say it's tough to make predictions, especially about the future. Yogi Berra taught us that, but that won't stop me. I'm going to try to swing the bat here and take a few predictions. So where do we sit today, folks? We all read the papers. We all watch the cable news shows. You've heard me before say it. Please turn off the cable news shows and enjoy your family over the dinner table. The papers are somewhat better in reading, but we're all saturated with the election. We want to be up to speed on every last move of the polls. So what did move recently was this number. I gave this speech a few weeks ago and a week ago or so, and that number right there was 8%. Biden had about an 8 to 10% lead on Trump. It is whittled away. I just showed you Trump's approval ratings going up. Not that Biden's have fallen, but Biden now sits overall nationally, and I know it doesn't matter because it's not a national election, it's electoral college. But right now he's sitting about 6.6% above Trump in the approval in the head-to-head kind of election. And on election day in 2016, Hillary was sitting about 3.2. So if you take that number and you look left to right there, it's about half of the lead that Biden currently enjoys. But of course she lost, right? And the question is, where are these polling people and who are they polling? So clearly on election day, those numbers were wrong, and they were wrong by a lot. The pollsters have gotten better, I think. They say they've gotten better in who they're getting to and asking that question, but I still think the pollsters are off. That number could be a lot bigger. That number could be a lot smaller. I think that number is probably smaller. I think Biden's lead right now is not sitting at 6%. I think it's probably smaller. So let's talk about the debates. Do they matter? They sure didn't matter in 2016. So if you look on the left hand here, Clinton, according to everybody, after the debates, she won all the debates, hands down. She won by a lot. She won by 20% on the first debate. She won by slightly less than that on the second and third debates, but she clearly won those debates. There was no doubt about that. And I think Trump really felt that he lost. Of course, he never would say it, but his advisors that I talked to, they felt they did not do well in those debates. So do they matter for this time around? And is Joe Biden a good debater? He's going to give it his best. He certainly has a trouble tripping over words, misplacing words a lot, but so does Trump. Trump has his wordsmithing in the last couple of years, and everyone knows those are words that he said. But here's the debate schedule. What's interesting about the debate schedule is a number of states are already allowing mail-in voting, of course, absentee voting. And so do these debates matter? Because a lot of people will have already voted and made up their mind. And certainly people who are completely in the Republican or Democratic camp have made up their minds. So the debates are really about the independents, the people who haven't yet decided. And believe it or not, there are people out there that have not yet decided who they're voting for, even though this election is crystal clear. Could not be more different people. People thought that of Hillary as well. Could not have been more different candidates. But there are people who have not decided who they're voting for. And then does the VP debate count, or does it matter? And that's on October 7th, as you can see in my chart there. I think that actually really does matter. Kamala is incredibly important for Joe Biden to get out the African-American vote. And as you all know, in 2016, Hillary did not get the African-American vote that she thought she was going to get. They just didn't show up like they did for Obama in the previous two elections. Of course, the Bernie Sanders voters did not show up like she was hoping for in her election. So again, folks, it's about turnout and who's going to turn out for Biden and Harris. And will the African-American vote turn out for Harris, as most people think they will? It is yet to be decided. So we will see on that, but that's a big question mark in their camp. What are the top election issues? So if you look at this in the yellow here, this was pre-COVID. What was really important to people was healthcare. That was the #1 issue going into the 2016 election as well, the economy and healthcare back and forth. But pre-COVID, back in February, it was healthcare. Now, if you look at my chart, post-COVID, it's the economy and jobs. So who does better on the economy and jobs? Who do people trust more to help the economy get better, get stronger, and get more jobs? What's interesting too is education. So look at the education numbers. Pre-COVID, it was only 5%. That was not that important of an issue. Now it's doubled. We care about our kids staying in our house. We don't want to be the teachers. I didn't sign up to homeschool my young children. This is what people are saying. The education system and structure of sending your kids to school is hugely important this year. Even if you're sending your kids to college, kids may have decided not to go start that college or that law school this year. That affected the whole family. So if you look at some of these issues, climate change, pre-COVID, climate change was 13%. Now I would argue climate change is back on the board because of the wildfires and the hurricanes we're experiencing in the last couple of months. But climate change did not gauge as much as it had pre-COVID. Immigration. Trump wanted to talk about immigration in this election. It is not nearly as important for him now post-COVID. So who do you trust on these issues? So this is also very important and relative to the last slide I just showed you. People trust Trump on the economy and on jobs. They trust Biden on coronavirus reform and vaccinations and pre-COVID healthcare, which I'm going to call Obamacare. The uninsured, that's still a major issue in this country. And it's also become an issue around COVID because if you don't have insurance, you're not going to the doctor, you're not finding out if you have the seasonal flu or if you're finding out if you have COVID. Of course, now most of the COVID tests are paid for, they're free. You should go get one if you're having any symptoms, of course. But these issues will come down, and you'll see it in the exit polling on election day when you watch the cable news, like I do. You can watch cable news on election day. These issues are very important and will decide how most voters are going to vote. So people around the world, this has also come out in the last few days. Are we going to get a vaccine? When are we going to get the vaccine? Are we going to get it before the election? Probably not. Are we going to get it before next year? Maybe. But are we going to take it? How many of us feel confident that what we're going to do and get that vaccine? There's the anti-vaxxers out there. There's the side effects of a vaccine that may not yet be proven. There's other issues related to getting a vaccine. So right now, 33% of Americans say they're concerned about getting the vaccine. So how will we deal with that as a country? 67% of us say we'll get it immediately. How will we get it? Will we be the first in line? Will our employers mandate that we get it, just like schools mandate that you get your tetanus shot before you can go to school? That's a big question for us. So all schools will mandate the COVID test before allowing your children back to school. Will our companies require that? How do you feel about that? Getting vaccinated for the COVID test? You might not be comfortable with that. So all of these issues of vaccination and when we're going to get this, they're related to how getting our economy back on its feet. So those out there who have said it might take a decade for us to recover, I think it depends on how much. I don't think it'll take a decade to recover the economy, but it really depends on how many people line up to get the vaccine and how quickly. So progress to contain the vaccine very quickly here. This is a 7-day average growth. You could see this every day in the papers. There are still a few hotspots out there in terms of the growth of COVID in the chart here, showing the ones that are in yellow or in orange, I guess. And how does that matter in terms of the swing states? So again, laying on politics here on top of some of these charts I'm showing you with COVID. Back in 2000, so 20 years ago, we were voting for Bush or for Gore, right? And you remember who you voted for. Bush won the states shaded in red. Gore won 2 of the states here. Of course, Bush won that election. So the shift in the swing states, I think, is pretty dramatic. Look at my chart, and I'm going to flip it to the swing states today. Here they are in 2000. Here they are in 2020. So only Florida and North Carolina are now considered the primary swing states. So in 20 years, these swing states have really shifted. And of course, I've shaded in red. Right now, Biden is pulling ahead in Georgia and in Texas, and the rest, at least right now, in the polls in these states, Biden is winning the blue states right now. How critical is voter turnout in the swing states? As I just said, it's all about the turnout. So young people in Wisconsin has been declining since 2004. So in 2004, it's 63% of turnout of that cohort between 18 and 24. But as you know, in Wisconsin, first of all, Bernie Sanders won the primary against Hillary, and of course, Trump won the state. So young people did not turn out in 2016. African-American voters in Michigan. I took a look at Michigan now and hit a 16-year low in 2016. Of course, it peaked there in 2008 when Obama was elected. So African-American voters in Michigan in just one state that I took a look at. So these things matter in terms of which cohorts are being sought after. Who is Biden going after? The young people, the minority communities. Who is Trump going after? That really matters, and if they're turning out. It doesn't matter if they're not going to turn out for you. Let's take a look at the House and the Senate really quickly. This is the current control of the Senate, 53 to 47. 53 Republicans there, so they have a slight margin, 6 seats. This is who is up. So 1/3 of the Senate turns over every 2 years. Republicans have a lot more people running. If you're shaded in red there, you're in a very precarious position in the polls right now. The Republicans are behind in those states. You're shaded in red. The Democrats are doing pretty well. They only have 12 people up for re-election. Of course, in Alabama, where Tommy Tuberville, the former Auburn coach, is right now dramatically ahead in the polls of Doug Jones. So the question for the Senate, and this really is key, can the Senate stay in Republican hands if Joe Biden wins? It's a question. It is the question of the moment. So right now, most pollsters, and certainly in some of the states that I've highlighted here, are showing that the Democrats are going to pick up the Senate. But what if Trump wins the White House? So Trump has a pretty good chance of winning the White House. A lot of people don't want to believe that. He has a very good chance, not a pretty good chance. This is Biden's election to lose. And so you have to think to yourself, if I'm going to vote Trump in the White House, what am I going to do with my Senate vote? Am I going to give it to the Democrats just to keep that check and balance, or enhance the check and balance that Nancy Pelosi already has? Or am I going to go all Republican on the ticket? So if Biden does win the White House, I think it will be a sweep. If Trump wins the White House, it'll be interesting to see whether the Democrats can still pick up the Senate, and they might. And that will be interesting. A lot of executive orders coming our way if that actually happens. The House, okay, no doubt about it, the current control. Nancy is in complete command. Question is, can she get to 250? I think she can pick up another 15 seats in the House. No way of Republicans winning the House right now. The House retirements were really bad news for the Republicans. 32 Republicans said, I'm out of here. This is no fun. And the Democrats only had a handful of retirements this year. So another reason why Nancy will pick up about 15 or so seats. Change elections are really the global norm. 24 countries have radically changed direction. The pendulum was swinging between liberals, very conservatives. If you think about the UK, Australia, any one of these, Canada, in the past couple of years, really has changed. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that we swing back to more liberal government with the Democrats sweeping everything. But again, Trump could hold on to the White House. Another really critical thing for the next presidential cycle is the Supreme Court. As you all well know, a lot of people vote just on this one particular issue. Do you want a conservative or a more liberal court? I would watch these two folks, shaded in blue, as everyone is watching, of course, Ruth Bader in the last several months, in the last several years. I would not put it past Mitch McConnell, should something happen in the Supreme Court after the election. If Trump loses the election, there is a small, very small window for Mitch McConnell to push through a lame duck Senate, another Republican nominee for the Supreme Court. And that could happen even if Trump loses the election. The Democrats would go crazy if they try to do that. But that could be a push. Okay, and Trump, of course, already has Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh, and you can see the court has shifted dramatically conservative with those two. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the Travelers Institute, what's happening. The rules of corporate engagement in Washington have certainly evolved with President Trump. Public policy and reputation management, there is a heightened scrutiny and an anti-corporate public opinion bashing, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican. It's fun to kind of bash corporate America if you're a politician. But we've established ourselves as a trusted thought leader in Washington. And this is really critically important for any company who wants to have credibility. Providing educational and informational materials, being a resource when those bills are being written. And our thought leadership vehicle has become the Travelers Institute. And I'm honored and humbled really to be able to be a part of it. And it's just been a terrific, there we are. We rang the, it's been a terrific vehicle for the company. And again, it's informational, it's educational. We go around the country, and here's one of our very last events we had right before COVID hit in mid-February. We rang the opening bell at the stock exchange, and that was a very fun time to celebrate our going into our 11th year. It was really to celebrate our 10th year, but we couldn't get scheduled at the exchange last year, so they put us on in February, and it was literally when the S&P hit an all-time high, and we were very pleased to do that. After we had that ringing bell, we went and held a symposium in their boardroom. So the symposium we did was on cybersecurity, prevent and prepare. We do a lot around that. And our other signature initiatives are in small business. Distracted driving has become a very big platform and a pillar for our company. Every Second Matters is that platform. We did a series of unfinished stories, unfinished videos, honoring the lives of people who have been taken in fatalities. And then autonomous vehicles has become another big platform. We did a thought paper on that recently. But Every Second Matters. I'll just spend 1 second here. Historical trends in US traffic fatalities. I don't have to tell you, you see this on the road all the time. People distracted on their phones. And fatalities went up dramatically in 2015, 16, 17. And we decided to take on this issue as a company. Pedestrian fatalities, over 6,000 last year. Another huge problem for society. And we try to take it on just like we took on drunk driving and seatbelt usage to raise awareness. Also troubling, in my box that I'm putting up right now, fatalities have increased 20% in the first 6 months of this year. While miles driven have been down 17%, this is according to the National Safety Council, these numbers are outrageous, that our fatalities on roads are up 20% when all of us were staying at home in lockdown. Be careful out there, my friends. Slow down. Put your phone down. Okay, cyber was another big platform for the company, and there we are at the boardroom of the stock exchange. Cyber insurance, as you all know, our agents and brokers out there, critically important during COVID because we're all working from home. We're all getting viruses on our computers, so please stay vigilant with your clients. Autonomous vehicles, here's our white paper on talking about ensuring autonomy and how we're going to do that in the future. Please pick that up if you have not. I found this interesting. The global opinion is really divided on self-driving cars. If you look at this chart, percentage of in favor or against self-driving cars. So India, China, South Korea, developing countries, and the population is much more willing to have these self-driving cars on the roads. But look at the developed countries, United States, Germany. People are not so willing. We're against a lot of the self-driving cars. Why is that? And why is the developing world more interested in self-driving? Because we're testing them. We're testing them. We're seeing crashes. We're seeing people asleep at the wheel while their autonomous vehicle is driving down 95 in New York. So the fact that we're testing them more and we're seeing more crashes here has caused public opinion to be against them. But I wanted to talk about just one moment in time, and I took the Tesla Model 3 here. In 2018, the Tesla Model 3 was the top 10 selling car in our country. Look at this chart. 2019, it was the #1 selling car in the mid-size luxury car category, the #1 selling car. So we are buying them. We are certainly buying automation and all the other companies that are out there doing automation, and here's the plethora out there. And so we're watching this. This is our next big idea or a big thing to really take on at the Institute, and we're excited to do it with you. So please join us as we take on more autonomous vehicle activity. And with that, I'm going to stop talking and see if I can answer some of your tough questions and turn it back to Katie to kind of screen those questions for us. So thank you for your time, all.
Joan, that was fantastic, and definitely a lot to unpack here. So as you said, let's get right to some of the audience questions. You can continue submitting questions through the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Joan, you referenced voter turnout earlier, and I know we've all seen a lot of activities around increasing voter turnout this year, especially with the options to vote by mail in many states, as you mentioned. So the question is, who would benefit more from higher voter turnout, Biden or Trump?
So as I said, Trump has a very, very dedicated base of support, and they will turn out for him. I have no doubt about it. They will turn out in person. They may mail in their ballots as well. Biden will most probably win the popular vote, just like Hillary did, just like Al Gore did. So the popular vote doesn't get you the White House. It's the electoral vote does. So Biden's electoral plan should be really, really robust. And his turnout plan should be robust for those swing states, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, all the states that Trump won that were historically in those Democratic categories. As I said, young people historically do not turn out. Bernie Sanders got them really, really excited. A number of my family members, Thanksgiving 2016, there were Bernie supporters talking about, but did they go vote for Hillary? That's the question. So will Bernie's voters turn out for Biden? Will Kamala Harris sufficiently excite the African American, the Latino vote in this country? And can they get voter turnout? If voter turnout is high on an overall basis, Biden gets the White House. If voter turnout is low, for whatever reason, if COVID or mail-in ballots, Trump wins the White House. So Trump's voters are going to turn out. The question is, will the Democrats excite their base enough to get them to turn out?
That's great. So let's keep going on that. Assuming the Biden-Harris ticket wins, what's the outlook for tax and healthcare policy? And if you can address, does it change if there's a divided government versus a blue wave?
So as I said, the blue wave certainly will bring you higher taxes and probably expanded healthcare. The question is, how far down on the income scale will Biden reach? As I said, he's already has a plan out there to increase taxes on those making more than 400,000. But is that enough? Well, they have to go down to 200,000, go down to 100,000. So my prediction is, if it's a blue sweep, you'll see that 400,000 threshold be closer to 200, maybe even closer to 100. To pay for the spending that Biden wants to do on healthcare, on climate change, on infrastructure. I mean, if Trump wins the White House, I think one of his major signature initiatives will be infrastructure spending. Frankly, he's a builder from New York City. He likes to build things. And the Democrats would go along with that, I think, in Congress. And they almost went along with it last time. So healthcare, tax policy, Democratic sweep, watch your wallets. But you enjoy a greater access to healthcare. Certainly, Biden will have expanded healthcare around COVID. They'll have a pandemic department probably within HHS to address future pandemics. I mean, this is not going away. None of us felt we could ever experience this kind of lockdown in our lives. We never anticipated this. So there will be a big amount of spending by pharmaceutical companies subsidized by the federal government working on a pandemic strategy.
All right, and another very interesting question. Assuming Trump loses, who is the de facto head of the Republican Party and who will be the nominee in 4 years? And then I guess following on that, what happens to Trump?
Okay, this is where I don't represent my company. This is the part where I represent myself. So there's a huge fight within the Republican Party as to who's going to carry the mantle. So you have people like John Kasich and Paul Ryan, again, trying to take the party back to where it was. Fiscal conservatism, conservatism on some social issues, but a very moderate kind of, I would say, in the middle, take the party back to where it was. Think about Bob Dole, Ronald Reagan, those type of characters. And then you have kind of Nikki Haley's out there. And then you even have Eric Trump, and you have Donald Trump Jr. And then you have Ivanka Trump. I think the Ivanka Trump story has not yet been told. She has positioned herself quite well to be the spokesman for the Republican Party in 4 years. You may see her on the ticket in 4 years. You may see Donald Jr., Nikki Haley on the ticket, John Kasich clearly on the ticket. He clearly wants to run. You might see Paul Ryan return. Certain senators, there's a number of qualified senators to take up the mantle, but it'll be a pretty big fight within the party. The question is, will Trump go away? I don't think Trump will go away, certainly in the first few days, maybe the first few weeks, unless it's a landslide by Biden. If it's a very tight race, just like we saw with Bush versus Gore, it will be very messy. It will be very messy for society, for the markets, civil unrest. This will not be a happy time, I think, in our country, unless, of course, one of them wins by a landslide. So I think I answered your 3 questions, but it'll be very interesting, the Republican Party, to regroup and figure out who is going to be the de facto leader of that.
Absolutely. So I'm seeing a number of questions coming in, as we mentioned, with the preface of assuming Biden wins or assuming Trump loses. And you mentioned some of the questions about polls. But what's your take, Joan? Who's going to win in November?
Oh, goodness. I knew it. Do I have to answer that? I will just say this. I think Trump's support is not factored in to the cable news shows, to the mainstream media. And I think Trump's support is out there. I think it's really strong. I'll leave it at that.
Sounds good. Joan, any parting words for us?
I just want to thank everyone. I've been incredibly honored to lead this Travelers Institute over these years, and to be able to put on these webinars for you. Please let me know what topics you want us to cover in the coming months. We're going to be at this, I think, longer than we think. I said through Thanksgiving, but obviously we're not going to be doing lots of conferences and symposiums in the future, so in the near future. So please give me your questions, and if I was unable to answer your questions today in this webinar, pick up the phone. Everyone knows my number, and give me a call. So back to you, Katie. I know we have some closing remarks for our next upcoming webinars.
Absolutely. And thanks, Joan, as always, for sharing your interesting economic and political outlook, especially in this year. And thanks to all of you for joining us today. I hope you will join Joan for our next webinar on September 30th, where she'll interview Ginny Brzezinski about her book, Comeback Careers, which she co-authored with her sister-in-law, Mika Brzezinski, co-host of MSNBC's Morning Joe. Ginny will discuss strategies for crafting the career of your dreams, no matter what age or stage of life you may be in. So mark your calendars, and I hope you'll join us for that one. You can register for that program at travelersinstitute.org and also watch recordings of our past webinars there. A note on today's webinar, we will have a replay available for a limited time if you want to watch or share with your colleagues anything that Joan said today, beginning next week. But that will be available probably 48 hours, so we'll let you know once that's ready. We'll email all of you once it's available for viewing and invitations for future programming. So thank you again, and please stay safe.
Thank you all.